Before we get going, I want to say thank you to Terry. Terry, it was so wonderful for you to help us out. Terry not only did 3 weeks of wonderful sermons, but she was the on-call pastor, so if anything happened, she would get the phone call, and that really helped me to spend a lot of time taking care of myself and self-reflection, and that's something that we kind of joke about as pastors sometimes, the self-care thing, but it was great. It was great. About halfway through, I was like, man, this is neat. Why have I never done this before? Our scripture today is from 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 9 through 18. One time after eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah got up and presented herself before the Lord. Now Eli the priest was sitting in the chair by the doorpost of the Lord's temple. Hannah was very upset, and she couldn't stop crying as she prayed to the Lord. Then she made this promise. Lord of heavenly forces, just look at your servant's pain and remember me. Don't forget your servant. Give her a boy, and then I'll give him to the Lord for his entire life. No razor will ever touch his head. As she kept praying before the Lord, Eli watched her mouth. Now, Hannah was praying in her heart. Her lips were moving, but her voice was silent. So Eli thought she was drunk. How long will you act like a drunk? Sober up, Eli told her. No, sir, Hannah replied. I'm a very sad woman. I haven't had any wine or beer, but have been pouring out my heart to the Lord. Don't think your servant is some good-for-nothing woman. This whole time I've been praying out my heart of great worry and trouble. Eli responded, then go in peace, and may the God of Israel give you what you've asked from him. Please think well of me, your servant, Hannah said. And then the woman went on her way, ate some food, and wasn't sad any longer. This is the word of God for the people of God. Hey, you know how I ask a question and some people raise their hands? Here's an easy one we can all do. Has anyone ever wanted something? Have you ever wanted something really bad, though? Have you ever wanted something so bad that you think you were going to die if you don't have it, excluding organ transplants? The mere thought of it keeps you going at night, keeps you awake. You can't sleep, you can't eat, you can't drink, you can't do anything. You're so consumed by the desire that nothing else matters. And you're not even sure if life's worth living if you can't have it, whatever it is. But have you ever wanted something so badly that you find yourself on your knees begging God for a child, maybe like Hannah? Or maybe it was for the news that you just received not to be true. Maybe it was just, please let me get a call back for a job interview or for a positive test result. Maybe it's begging for justice or mercy or even just grace, or simply begging God to show you a sign, any sign, just some direction, a ray of hope, something to follow. In the ancient world, large families were key to economic success, and especially if you could have a lot of kids, when the kids were just old enough to help out with the family trade, it really helped economically. Therefore, large families, they were seen as a blessing, but those who were unable to have children were looked at as though something was wrong, and not just medically, that it was believed that it was a problem with their relationship with God. Now, we know that's not true. But that's what they thought. They thought it was a curse or a withheld blessing. And Hannah is one of the most poignant people in our Bible. Like several other women in the scriptures, she was barren. And to make matters worse, her husband's other wife not only bore children, but teased her about it, bullied her and taunted her, especially during family meals and their yearly trip to the temple. Now, her husband tried to help, but he was a guy. And most of us suffer from this thing where we take off our shoes and we put it in our mouth. In verse 8, he asks Hannah, he says, Hannah, why are you crying? Why aren't you eating? Why is your heart broken? Am I not better than 10 sons? I don't think that helped. Hannah just wanted this one thing, a son. And we're assuming Hannah couldn't give birth to boys or girls, but mostly she wanted a son because in the culture of that time, it would have made Elkanah happy, but it would have also fed that other wife, Peninnah, some humble pie. See, Hannah was Elkanah's first wife. And so it doesn't matter when she gives birth to that first son, he automatically is the next in line. And that meant Peninnah one day would have to acknowledge that Hannah's son is the head of house, and also that Hannah would be the head matriarch of the house. So once at the house of the Lord in Shiloh, while they were giving their yearly sacrifices, Hannah was praying so intently and her lips moved silently, and the words she spoke to God in her heart. Now, I don't always do this, but I retranslated this one little piece. And her soul was embittered. And as she prayed to God, she sobbed uncontrollably. And she made this vow aloud: Lord of hosts, if you see the misery that I, your servant, suffer, if you remember me and do not forget me and give me a son, I will give him to serve you all the days of his life and will never cut his hair. Sometimes those little word choices in Hebrew can make all the difference. Her soul was bittered. And as she prayed to God, she sobbed uncontrollably. Eli the priest saw her and accused her of being drunk. Have you ever seen someone so upset, so distraught that you thought that maybe that they were drunk? I've seen it personally because I used to work in the military with a lot of next of kin notifications, and people can be so distraught. They can be so inconsolable that they look like they're on something. Now, I want to point out that they're experiencing that because of a loss, because of a tragedy. But can you imagine wanting something so bad that that same symptom is there? And when she answered to Eli that she was praying, Eli told her to go in peace and may God give you what you've asked for. So they go home and she conceives a son, and when he's born, she names him Samuel, which means God hears. But Hannah had made a promise to God if she bore a son, she would give him back for God's service. And so she followed through on that promise, and she handed her young child Samuel over to Eli for training as a priest, the very priest who she first encountered, who called her drunk. She said, "Excuse me, sir, as surely as you live, I'm the woman who stood here praying to the Lord. I prayed for this boy, and the Lord gave me what I asked for from him. So now I give this boy back to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is given to the Lord." And then they worshiped God together. Now Hannah was blessed with 3 more sons and 2 more daughters, and Samuel grew up to be the last of Israel's judges, the first prophet, and the counselor to its first 2 kings, Saul and David. Hannah persevered, and that's what we can learn. Even though God was silent, she still believed God listened, and she never gave up. After years of praying for the same thing, most of us would have given up. But Hannah didn't. She was devout, and God heard her, and she teaches us too to never give up. But I want to ask you, have you yearned like Hannah before in your life? Maybe not for a son, but what have you yearned just to want to know God better? What if that uncontrollable gnawing pain was just because we wanted to get to know God better? Rachel Held Evans was an American Christian columnist, blogger, and author. She gave voice to a generation of people who had left the church that are still wrestling with their faith and trying to find the way back in. She's probably known best for her 2012 book. It's called A Year of Biblical Womanhood, where she followed the biblical instructions for how women were supposed to live to their most literal extent. So the book of Leviticus became a handbook of some for her. This included a lot of the things that we don't think of, and she tried to do all of them. And it kind of pointed out some of them are silly. But Miss Evans left the church in 2014. She said she was done trying to end the church's culture wars, and she wanted to focus on building new communities among people who were fleeing the church. She yearned. You can hear in her writing that she yearned like Hannah, but she yearned not for a child, but to know God more fully and to help others come to know this God she was on a journey discovering, a God that was different from the God she grew up with. And you can hear this specifically in the introduction to her latest book, Inspired, Slaying Giants, Walking on Water, and Loving the Bible Again. It's a good book. I like it. But I'm going to read you a piece of the introduction. Once upon a time, there lived a girl with a magic book. Like many other books, this one told tales of kings and queens and farmers and warriors, giants and sea monsters, and dangerous voyages. But unlike any other book, it cast a spell over all who read it, so they were pulled into the story, cast as characters in a great epic, full of danger and surprise. From the book, the girl learned how to be brave like the shepherd boy David, clever like the poor peasant Ruth, and charming like the beautiful Queen Esther. She memorized the book's proverbs, which were said to hold the secret to a rich and happy life. And she sang the book's ancient songs just as they had been sung for thousands of years. And she learned with enough faith that you could topple a giant with a slingshot. You could turn water into wine and survive 3 days in the belly of a giant fish. You could even wrestle an angel. She learned, too, how to defend the book against its enemies, those who said the story wasn't true. She could fashion the book into a weapon if she wanted and wield its truth like a sword. Rumor had it the book was divinely inspired, and she believed it because every time she read, it echoed with the voice of God. When the girl met a teacher named Jesus in the story, she heard that voice even louder than before. So she promised to love him and to follow him forever. And he taught her to care for the poor, to be kind to the lonely, to forgive the bullies, and even to listen to her mother. He healed the sick and raised the dead and said to those who followed him that they would do the same. The girl never healed the sick or raised the dead, but still, she believed. But then one day the story began to unravel. The girl was older now with a mature and curious mind, and she noticed things that she hadn't before, like how God rewarded the chosen patriarch Abraham for blindly obeying God's request that he sacrifice his own son, or how God permitted chosen people of Israel to kidnap women and girls as spoils of war. After the famous walls of Jericho came tumbling down, an army appointed by God slaughtered every man, woman, and children. And after Pharaoh refused to release his slaves, an angel of God killed every firstborn boy in Egypt. Even her favorite story of all the earth's animals taking refuge in a giant ark started with a God so sorry that he created creation that he was ready to wash it all away. She thought if God was supposed to be the hero of the story, then why was he behaving like the villain? And if the book was supposed to explain all the mysteries of life, why did it leave her with so many questions? And with each question, the voice of God grew quieter and the voices of others grew louder. And these were dangerous questions, they said, forbidden questions, especially for a girl. They told her to fight against the doubts, but her sword grew heavy. They told her to stand strong in her faith, but her knees grew weak. Words that once teemed with life nettled her mind and now triggered her doubts and darkest fears. It was as if the roots of the beloved trees had risen up to her to trip her on the path, and there was no map for a world so suddenly rearranged, no way to light the road ahead, and she was lost. And yet the spell remained unbroken. The characters, many of whom were more sinister now, wandered in and out of her life just as they had before, interrupting her work, interrupting her relationships, her plans. And the old stories continued to be told, and the old battles continued to be waged, and she couldn't get those ancient songs out of her head. she was still caught in the story, like millions before her and millions after, and she couldn't run away. And that's when the adventure really began. That's an excerpt from the introduction to Inspired. And many of you know Rachel Held Evans passed away after a short bout with the flu earlier this year. Her adventure seemed to just be getting started, and now it seemed to be cut short. She had worked very hard to get a conference going in October, and that will go on. It'll just be much different. But a while back she wrote, "When I left the church at age 29, full of doubt and disillusionment, I wasn't looking for a better produced Christianity. I was looking for a truer Christianity, a more authentic Christianity." In that same book, Searching for Sunday, she writes, "There's a difference between curing and healing, and I believe the church is called to the slow and difficult work of healing. We're called to enter into one another's pain, anoint it as holy, and stick around, no matter the outcome." For Evans, this was part of her legacy. Even as she rejected certain notions of the way things had been in Christianity, often throwing herself into the middle of intense fights over race, gender, sexuality, and even got into politics, she still retained the respect of those that she argued with. In the days following her death, many Christian leaders who publicly and sometimes bitterly disagreed with her came forward, including the president of the Southern Baptist Convention and several bloggers that used to get into it with her all the time. And Beth Moore even wrote, "What is it about this woman that people all take off their hats, no matter if they agreed with her or not?" It was that authenticity. A few years earlier in an interview, she said, "Death is a thing that empires worry about, not a thing resurrection people worry about. And as long as there's someone baptizing, breaking bread, serving wine, as long as there are people confessing their sins, healing, walking with one another through suffering, then the church is alive, and it is well." She yearned for God. Hannah yearned for a son. Hannah eventually got a son and then some, and she came away with a closer relationship with God through all that prayer. And Rachel Held Evans, through her personal yearning, became a leader to thousands of people who had walked away and given up on the church. She made people want to seek God again. She made people want to read their Bibles again. For some people, she made the Bible holy again. And she did that through seeking an authentic relationship with God and seeking to be authentic with others. But what will our legacy be? Will we yearn for more stuff, success? Or are we going to yearn to authentically seek God and be authentically Christian with one another? Because people are hurting and yearning. And when we encounter them, the ones with the questions, the ones with the tears, the ones with the hurts, will we respond like Eli responded and send them away? Or will we recognize the Hannahs, the Rachels? Will we recognize ourselves there pleading to God in that great struggle? How will we respond to them? God calls us to serve them. And you know, when God calls, what we're supposed to say, "Here I am, Lord, send me." So why don't we all stand up and sing together? As you go forth from this place, take these words with you. If you're pleading, keep pleading. If you're seeking, keep seeking. And if you're yearning, keep yearning. Go forth in peace and help others to do the same.